explain this to you guys. Folks in the back row, thumbs up. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome aboard. Happy to have you. If you are a school in America, or at least a college in America, and you take public funding, you need to have Constitution-related programming on Constitution Day, which is what today is, of course. And whatever you do with that programming is your choice. We had a voter registration drive earlier today. Thank you to those of you, and there are several of you in the crowd right now that volunteered for that, and several others who actually signed up for that, so that's awesome. But what we are doing today is we're going to have a conversation for about 45 minutes or so about something that happened locally but had national conversation and national ramifications. So we want to go ahead and talk about that, the experience from 2018 when Rick Gardner, who is joining us, and we'll introduce him in just a moment, and the city of Ozark had a cross on public land and faced some national outcry over it. Before we do any of that, I do want to take a moment and talk about freedom of religion for just one moment, because it's in the Constitution. This is part of the First Amendment. The American government is intended to be secular. That's at least the idea of this one particular part of the First Amendment that we'll talk about in a moment. Secular, by the way, gets a bad rap that oftentimes people think that means non-religious, but it means, it means anti-religious, but it actually means non-religious. That is, of course, what it's about. This creates the fabled wall between church and state, even though the Constitution does not say there needs to be a wall between church and state. Now, with that in mind, that's not strictly a wall. That wall is more of a beaded curtain. And there's actually plenty of times where that wall is penetrated. After all, and I know I have people sitting in front of that, but what can you do? The government, for instance, gives money to Catholic hospitals. We should know that. We have a big one in Springfield. In addition to that, the government gives money to certain religious preschools. In addition to that, most religious institutions get tax, what's the phrase? They don't have to pay taxes on their donations. And of course, religious charities are sometimes government subsidized as well. So while the Constitution does say the government can't establish a religion, it does have a couple ways to get around that in certain ways. Now we'll talk about, we'll get into a conversation about Ozark here in just one moment, but I'll remind us the first part of the freedom of religion is what we'll be talking about today. The first part of freedom of religion says, and this is actual language from the Constitution itself, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And again, what this basically means, called the Establishment Clause, and what this basically means is that the government can't endorse or establish an official religion. Not only that, but it's at least not supposed to constitutionally promote or demote one religion from the others. Now with that in mind, how we enforce that gets pretty finicky. Because different judges like different tests. There's things called the Lemon test, neutrality test, non-preferential treatment test, the rational observer test, the non-endorsement test, the strict scrutiny test. There are different tests and they each have different ramifications, and we won't be talking about those today. Instead, I want to go ahead and open the floor to our speakers today, as well as myself. I'll be joining them. We have the president of Politically Active, Hunter Klaus. We have a member of Politically Active, and Sophie McIntyre. Did I say that right? And Rick Gardner, who is the mayor of Ozark. Round of applause for Rick Gardner for joining us. Let's go ahead.
All right, so we're going to start with some basic foundations on this case for those of you who don't know. So what led you to put up the cross, and where did you put it up?
Well, the city did not put up the cross. The cross had been in the public, had been in the park, the Ozark Thin River Park, for probably 20 years. For those of you who have not been to Ozark, next time it's Christmas, you need to drive through the park, the river, because we have a phenomenal light display. Not a supply, a light display. And it's big, it's been there for 20 years, it's known around the country.
Nice.
And when that first started, there was a group that put up a cross, and it was accepted. There were a lot of other non-religious Christmas symbols. There were sleds and Santas and snowballs and all kinds of things, but it was put up then, 20 years ago, and it's been there and had been there in the same place on on the same pole for over 20 years and when this happened. So the city didn't really put it up. It was one of many, many displays that were put up in the park.
That's the first time I've heard that particular aspect of the story. What was the group?
Christmas Lights of Ozark, CLOZ, C-L-O-Z, and it was an economic development effort to try to draw tourists, draw people into Ozark. And I mean, Springfield has nothing like it, Branson does, but it's quite nice, but it's not all religious. It's a drive-through display, and that was why, to draw people into Ozark, and it worked.
Well, in the story, that if you read the newsletter about this story, at some point you were interviewed by the newsletter, I imagine a couple times, right? You were interviewed by the newsletter a couple times, huh? And that's right. And they had said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I stole a microphone."
And in the interview, they had quoted you as saying, "This is Christian County for Pete's sake." What do you mean by that? I know like Ozark is actually in Christian County. Is that all you meant?
That's a really good question. There were a lot of people in Ozark, myself included, that were a little irate. We had never heard of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They're the ones that complained. And we'd never heard of them. And all of a sudden we got this terribly demanding letter that we removed the cross that had been there for about 20 years. And of course my first reaction was, I am a Christ follower, so I personally support the cross and what it means. So I remember saying that, and it was, I think it was in the paper. Of course, Christian County was named after a man whose last name was Christian, and it has nothing to do with a religion. But I was just sort of aggravated when I said that. So yeah, that was a good, accurate quote. That answer your question?
All right, so our next question is, so you said you knew the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Yes.
But did you know exactly what they were and why they were?
I didn't know until we looked into it, but they're just an organization that, to the best of my knowledge, protects Americans' right to freedom from religion, to having a religion imposed upon them. And their contention was that the cross was Ozark's attempt to establish Christianity as a religion. I mean, that seems a little far-fetched because cities don't normally do that, but just the fact that we had a 20-foot cross, they took issue with that. And they demanded that we take it down.
All right, so what were the public's responses throughout this ordeal? I know that the cross was brought to attention by someone in the community, is that correct?
Yes, apparently there is a member of that organization that lives in Ozark. They were never identified, and that's fine. They certainly had the right to do what they did. But they complained, or I don't know if complaint is the right word, they informed this Freedom from Religion organization that there was a cross on city property. And so that is what they're all about, trying to keep from happening. So they sent us a letter to remove it.
The story got a lot of national attention.
Oh, yeah.
Were you getting messages from like across the states or even over the ocean?
No, I don't think I got any from across the ocean, but I got a lot of local and statewide, a lot of support from people in high places, so to speak, that supported it, but of course, they knew that it shouldn't be there. Okay, they weren't, nobody, there were people that thought we ought to fight it, and it was a fight that we would not have won. And we realized that, but nobody ever thought about it. It had been there for 20 years. It was just part of the Christmas display. So once we realized what the issue was, that it was a cross, it was clearly on city property, lit for probably 6 weeks during the holiday season, we understood that we needed to move it.
So I want to just before we get into
Before we get into the constitutionality, all that good stuff, did you have any idea, like, when you became mayor, that a Finley River Park could get you angry messages from people in Idaho, in Maine, in Florida?
No, I had no idea, but there weren't very many angry messages. Most of them, I mean, this one.
What would you say, 50-50, positive, negative, or 90-10? What would you say?
95-5. a 95 in favor. But most of those people didn't realize that we really needed to move it. But they were in favor of having a cross. So that's just the culture of where we live. I mean, there were a lot of people in favor of it. They didn't want to move, but we knew we had to.
And when you say 95.5, how many messages are we talking about? Hundreds, thousands?
You'd have to go back to Facebook,
Yeah.
which I'm not a terribly big fan of, but because it takes a lot of time. But anyway, most of it was supported on Facebook, and there were a few that were. So
Could you feel it on a daily basis? You show up to the office, you and the city, or your government at least, is in the midst of a national conversation. Could you feel it on a daily basis?
not really. And I think that's because of where we live. I mean, most of the people in Ozark were supporting. And so I didn't feel like I was being persecuted, or the city didn't. We knew we had a problem to fix. The biggest problem we had to find, or had to take care of, was where do we move it to?
So you're saying, so most of the pressure actually came from support from the community, even though you knew you had to move it,
Oh,
but it was
yeah,
kind of the opposite in the community?
Yeah, there were a lot of people that said, we don't want you to move it. I had all kinds of emails from people all around Missouri on how to wage war, a fight against this group because they didn't like them. But that's a lot of the culture of where we live in this part of Southwest Missouri. So it was mostly support, but there were angry people.
Did it reaffirm what you already knew, or did it surprise you, the fervor with which people regard this subject and this symbol?
I don't know that I was really surprised. I was gratified, but I don't know that I was surprised. You have to live in Ozark to know why I feel that way. But the community was just very supportive. Back into a discussion, religious discussion, that's just kind of the way Ozark is. So.
Did you ever think that it was unconstitutional? It sounds like you did think it was unconstitutional, but you didn't want to.
No, I once I realized it was unconstitutional, which didn't take very long at all, because nobody ever thought about it.
Yeah.
Okay, and we have a city attorney that brought that to our attention very quickly, because all of the correspondence from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, I mean, a lot of it came to me because I'm the mayor, but I funneled that sort of thing through the city attorney, and knowing that it was probably something that was right, and she said, yep, you need to move it.
Okay, so I want to ask about this because the timeline of events was the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I want to make sure I get their name right. The Freedom of Religion Foundation writes you the letter, and the city of Ozark, and perhaps you, I don't know exactly what your role in this process would be, decides, you know what, yeah, the cross has to go down. It's a pretty quick response. Although there was a moment where you were, at least on Facebook, the city of Ozark said, we are reviewing this situation, so for now the cross will stay up. Like, if it's an open and shut case, in your opinion, as you seem to be, why did you take an additional moment to leave the cross up to it?
Well, it was in the Christmas lights of Ozark, and we had to find a home for it, and there was nothing that made us believe that we had to do it in 24 hours. And so we kind of waited till Christmas was over, and then we did what we should have done.
Well, where does it reside now?
Well, for those of you who might be familiar with Ozark, there is a part of the city park that is owned to the city, and there's a part of the park that we lease from an organization that's been there for a long time that like sponsors the fair, and it is a private party. The city leases it, and then there is a part of that part that we don't own that they lease to somebody else, and it's called the Christian County Saddle Club. Okay, so any property that we own or leased would be affected by that, anything we had control over. So we were hoping that we would find a home. We were strategizing, and somebody actually came to us, and that was it's called the A&M Society. They own the park and the Saddle Club, and they said, well, we have a place over here where you could put that, and we would like for it to, if you need to move it, which they knew we did, you can put it here.
That is such a creative solution. So it's basically, next to the park, but not in the formal park anymore, and so now it's protected by.
No, it's in the
free-
park.
Oh,
But it's actually in the park, and it's like 1,000% more visible than it was before, which is the irony.
But it's now
of it.
protected by free speech and
Right.
free exercise of religion.
Yeah, it is literally, the A&M Society was formed 75 years ago by a group of people. The park is in the floodplain, the Finley River. It can't be used for anything else. And they bought it so that they would have a place for the county fair. And we lease it, they use it the rest of the time for a park. And so they said, well, we own it, you can put it over here. And where they wanted us to put it is if you've ever been over the bridge over the Finley River in Ozark, it's just like, boom, right there, and it'll be lit up for 6 or 8 weeks during Christmas. And it appears to be in the park.
So it's still kind of part of the light show, the Christmas light show?
Oh, very definitely part of the light show, you can't miss it. But it's not in city-owned or controlled property.
Right.
Did the Freedom from Religion Foundation get back to you on that then, since you did move it? Were
No,
they more
no, they
mad
didn't have anything else to say.
I guess I
Um,
can't
It
remember.
wasn't, I mean, we complied with what they told us, we just kind of drug our feet a tiny bit, but
Malicious
a couple of
compliance,
weeks,
I understand.
you know, when the Christmas is over.
Kind of.
So,
Awesome, so we're gonna look back a little bit, and are crosses inherently religious symbols when we're talking about just putting something up in general? So, because I know some arguments for the crosses have historical significance and not just religious significance.
You're looking for a sermon. No, you're right. I mean, the cross originally was certainly a religious symbol. Sure, because that's the cross that Christ was crucified on. And so that became a symbol, but there are a lot of people, maybe individuals and people groups that still use the cross in cemeteries and they don't follow Christ. And I was in an Indian reservation once where I saw that and asked that question. So, and then there was something in this right after the first year, I think there was and you all may know more about this, that there was a large marble cross somewhere on the East Coast that somebody complained about, and it turned out to be something that was fashioned after a World War I memorial burial cross. And the Supreme Court said that was not a Christian symbol, it was a World War I symbol.
Funny you should mention that. Literally the next thing we want to talk, it's like you knew. It's like you knew. I want to talk about, you did not, that's true. Was not given the notes, he was not given notes prior to the test. I want to talk about that for a minute because this name is a mouthful. This is a Supreme Court case that we're referencing, and this was actually adjudicated or at least heard in February, but they issued a ruling June. Anyways, it was called Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission versus the American Human Association, who was probably suing to get it removed. And this was a government cross on government land, as you said. It's marble, looks pretty lovely, and it commemorates World War I, who we lost in World War I. At the end of the day, after the court heard the case, this guy who's behind me, his name is Samuel Alito. He's the judge that wrote the opinion. And once again, sorry that this is behind our bodies here, but his opinion was that it's become a prominent community landmark and that removing it would not be seen as neutral because it's been there about a century, but as hostile towards religion. Now, obviously, we want the government's actions to be neutral. We want it to be neutral to religion. We want to be neutral to religion. And normally, this is an interesting ruling because it says if you put up a cross, maybe that's endorsing religion, but it said in this case taking down a cross would actually be seen as hostile to religion, and that is not, the government should not be allowed to do that necessarily. And that's because its argument was the cross wasn't just a religious symbol. It also had cultural and societal purposes, which are therefore secular. Your thoughts on that?
It makes sense to me what you said, but I didn't read the opinion, I just knew about it.
Well, when I was listening to the oral argument, the lawyer that was arguing for the cross, he said that the cross is also a symbol of perseverance, and that's something more secular, perhaps, that you don't necessarily. Now, we did get questions from, judges that we know very well, like the RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she was like, is not the cross the prominent religious whatever? But yeah, the
It
judges,
doesn't
the
look like a
majority.
lot of crosses. That,
In what way do you think, in what way do you think that it's different?
well, the cross arms are a little higher and shorter than what you typically see on a Christian cross, but not that that makes a whole lot of difference. It's still a cross, but just the proportions and dimensions.
Looks like it says valor at the base too.
Yes,
Right?
it does.
So that was a really contentious, because now it seems to suggest that some crosses on public land are okay. In your opinion, let's just make you emperor of Ozark. You're not mayor anymore. You're now the emperor. In your opinion,
All in favor of
Turning
Rick
him-
Gardner for emperor, raise your hand.
turning a man into an emperor produces interesting sounds. Was the cross in Finley River Park, if you had to say it, a cultural and societal landmark, not just a religious
I
landmark?
think it was probably both. When it was put up, as I understand it, as I remember it, and that's been 20 years ago, it was put up by a church group. So I think their intentions were strictly religious. But it had become a part of the Christmas landscape, so part of it was cultural. But what you will still see in that light display, there are a lot of angels. There are a lot of Christian, non-Santa Claus, snowman type symbols that are in there, and they don't consider those religious. They are more cultural, more holiday-ish. So, don't answer the
No,
question.
but that's interesting, because where do you draw the line at
It's
what
hard.
is too Christian? Like a cross could be argued to be the foremost, but like angels are religious, but everybody has an angel on their shoulder, like, I can understand how that could go either way.
Well, the Supreme Court can't even decide.
They cannot. Matter of fact, this was a 7-2 decision, which is an okay majority, but that still means that among the 9 of the smartest people, that there's disagreement on this issue.
Right. Right.
Sorry.
No.
I was just going to ask, there's still a nativity scene in the Christmas display, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Yeah, that was the other thing. Yeah, angels, nativity scenes. That is part of Christmas, according. I mean, apparently that's approved by the Supreme Court because it was the cross, and we had a lot of people tell us that chimed in on this from all over the country and offered to send us money, and it was pretty interesting. But there are certain things that they just said you can't really say that that's all religious, but the cross was.
I want a show of hands from folks who are here with us right now. We're talking, and once again, we have 9 of the smartest people on the planet that all disagree with each other on this issue. This is on the coast of Maryland, some city, visible from a highway, a 40-foot cross, says Valor at the base. It's a World War I commemorative cross. Constitutional, show your hands. Unconstitutional, show your hands. All right, a little bit more of a majority for the constitutional side. You think so, maybe?
I'm going into law, so I have to think about it.
All right.
It has a lot of both sides, because it is a historical monument, but it is a cross that they erected. Who put it up? Was it the government? Originally put it up in 1944.
You wouldn't happen to know that, would you?
This cross right here, no, I have no idea. But,
No.
Yeah.
Or when.
Anybody, any idea when that cross is put up? Okay.
Google it.
Rose.
It was originally put on private land, and it was only when the county had to put the road through that direction that the county wound up owning it as a traffic interchange. So it was put up on private land originally.
Thank you, Rose. Rose Barber, political science instructor here at OTC. Thank you very much. Okay. Very nice. All right, so let's do another show of hands, and Sophie Hunter will throw this to you guys as well. That was the Speaker of the House. I don't know if you saw that. The Speaker of the House, Missouri Speaker of the House, weighed in on Facebook.
Oh, I certainly did see it. I got a phone call from him.
Yeah.
He said, what do you need?
What do you need? He was ready to fight it? Yeah, okay. We should have brought him as well for this. He's actually an OTC grad. Anyways, this one, probably you've heard of this one. This is the cross at Ground Zero after the 9/11 attacks. after 9/11, just a week ago, 9/11 anniversary was, and one of these surviving beams had a horizontal beam going through it and turned into a monument at the base of the government's Ground Zero exhibit. Show of hands. Constitutional. Lots of hands this time. Unconstitutional. Rick, your thoughts?
Well, you just kind of sprung it on me, so I haven't had a chance to think about it.
Well,
I will. I'm not afraid to weigh in. I would say it's constitutional because it's a relic from the disaster. I mean, it's a commemorative. It's
Hunter?
so,
Going into law, but also being a Christian myself, very conflicted, because in my heart, I want to say it's constitutional. We have in God we trust on our money, on our courts, it's everywhere. But I just thought at this second that maybe the cross has also become so intertwined with Americans' history. English is hard for me. Personally, crazy. That's become so woven into our fabric that it's no longer just Christianity. It's also part of America.
So this was actually a court case. Somebody brought this up and the judge ruled.
In favor, and the judge ruled in favor because much of the same reason we talked about the World War I monument is allowed to stand because it's considered an artifact, and in addition to being maybe implying a religious symbol, I don't know if you'd call this, I mean, it's clearly a cross, but like nobody made it. It was just kind of persevered from a tragic event. And so it stands as an artifact as that historical event as well. Sophie?
I think personally, I agree that it's an artifact, it's historical, it has importance, very, very big importance, but going purely constitutionally, that we can't put up any crosses because we can't favor religion over non-religion, and maybe just part of the way it's displayed could be part of it, because if they put it up as a cross.
And I hear this all the time, every semester, what about in God we trust on our money? And this, once again, in God we trust is referenced, it's such an old phrase, it's been on our money since I think there's been money, that is regarded as intertwined with our historical narrative. And so as a result, it's constitutionally defended. It gets smacked down. Every lawsuit to try to get in God we trust off the money gets smacked down for this reason. It's considered a bit of a historical artifact.
I would say that taking in God we trust off our money would also be an attack on religion now. Back in the day, maybe not because it seemed religious, but today it's just part of who we are as Americans.
this country was founded on that premise, period. End of story.
That being said, can we get to the next question? Because I really want to see let's play a game. Let's
Instead of playing a game of WWJD, which is the religious angle of this, let's play WWRD, and let's see what Rick would do.
Maybe they're the same.
So what would Gardner do? Would you rewrite the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment differently, or take it out altogether if you could?
I wouldn't rewrite it, I'd leave it in, and it has to be observed. I think everybody has to play with the same rules.
This one kind of sounds a little bit bad, but what about our non-Christian Americans? Would we need to consider them and their preferences, or when we erect like crosses on public
Well,
places?
I think that we did. We took it off of public land. And I'd be willing to bet that there are a lot of people in the Freedom from Religion Foundation that are Christ followers or that are Christians. Don't say, I don't think it's fair to say that they're not. They just believe in the separation of church and state, the establishment clause, the country, by way of the Constitution, and we have no right to declare a favorite. Or we could, every religion there was could put up a monument. And but I would not be in favor.
I just want to ask about that, because let me play devil's advocate for a moment for fun. When you do what I think is a pretty clever solution and find land adjacent to the park, or more or less in the park that's on
It
private.
found us.
It found you.
We were looking.
Yeah, so.
It found us.
and you move the cross basically within the park, matter of fact, in a more prominent place in the park, is there any part of you that says to yourself, all right, so I'm marching to the letter of the Establishment Clause, but am I truly honoring the spirit? Because we still have a Christmas drive, or not a Christmas drive, but a holiday display in Finley River Park. We still have a cross that's even, to your words, even more prominent than it was before. Is there any part of you that thinks maybe the spirit of the Establishment Clause is not being honored?
Whose spirit? The ones that are for it or against it?
I would argue, in my devil's advocate role,
That's fine.
the spirit of the
I'll like you anyway.
Okay, the spirit of the Constitution, because the Constitution says the government cannot establish, it cannot promote a religion, and just devil's advocate here, the government has decided to move across to a place that's at least privately owned, but is now more prominent display of Christianity.
Well, the Supreme Court can't decide on a lot of things, so I don't know that I'm going to be able to give an answer that I can say is correct. We think that we did the right thing because the majority of people wanted the cross to stay there, and the people vote for us. We work for the people, and the comments were just huge in favor of leaving the cross where it was, and that would have been disastrous and expensive. So we think that we did what the community wanted by leaving it in a prominent spot. We didn't pick the prominence of the spot. I mean, there are those that would say, and for those of you that are offended by this, I sincerely apologize, that it was a God thing. I mean, those people came to us and said, we would like for you to put the cross here. And the fact that it happens to be in a much more prominent place, we kind of rejoiced. So we just, rather than us look any further and have to spend some money to buy another piece or to lease another piece or to ask somebody else to do that, we just said, fine.
Nobody gave you grief about the nativity scene, but the cross they were upset about?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm a man of faith myself, and so I can see through somebody who is a non-Christian why the cross would be an endorsement of religion, but the nativity scene, that's literally Jesus, right? That's literally Jesus Christ in a manger.
The whole idea.
I don't fully understand that. Can we throw that to the audience real quick? Let's do the devil's advocate thing real quick. Moving the cross to private land, although still basically part of the park. Constitutional, show of hands. Okay, looks like you ended up on the right side. And unconstitutional, show of hands. All right, there's a devil's advocate for a reason. Oh, come on now.
Are you ever going to vote for something that you want me to vote for?
I hope so. I'm kidding. I hope so.
Probably.
I'm joking.
I would kill to see a Hunter Rick campaign.
2020. Look out.
I will be his vice.
Raven, did you have a thought?